Order, it's August 31st. 5:03. May I have a motion to call the meeting to order? So move. Second. All in favor? Yep. Opposed, carried. Okay, item number 2 is the adoption of the agenda. A motion to adopt the agenda. Second. Second. Any additional items?
I distributed a motion earlier to everyone. I didn't copy Marina because I thought I sent it to Raincoast instead. Can we get that on the agenda?
Okay, we'll put that item number 6, right, with council discussion. Okay, with that, we'll move to public participation. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to speak? Okay. And we'll go to the online members after the gallery. Thank you.
I'm Gail Craig. I live on Mountain up just about at sunset. Just a couple of things here. The shock that we all felt watching the news on the fires that were still happening in West Kelowna, the Shuswap, Sorrento, is upsetting and heartbreaking. Thank you, Council, for making the difficult but critical decision on August 22nd to close the village parking for hiking. Our short-staffed work crew did a fantastic job on the 24th and the 25th, getting the necessary signage to the center up in time for the weekend. This action greatly reduced the high numbers of visitors and decreased the risk of a human-caused wildfire. Our low creek supplies means that there's not enough water to fight a wildfire spreading into the village for a long period until the BC Wildfire Service arrives. Contamination from a fire in our watershed would impact our water supply for years. In the event of a wildfire, if there are high numbers of hikers going to Tunnel Bluffs, the hikers could become stranded on the mountain. If an evacuation is required from the village, the increased number of vehicles evacuating on our roads could put lives at risk. We had rain showers the evening of August 28 and the morning of August 29. And the North Shore News, the title of the story and the story itself, which quoted the negative statements, actually indicated that to the public, the trails were already closed, were already reopened, pardon me, on the 29th after that rain. However, that doesn't seem to be what really happened. A fire here is still possible, even with recent rain showers that will have barely reached the forest floor. A couple of days of sun and summer temperatures will put us right back into drought conditions again. Last year, level 3 restrictions did not end until October the 6th. Council, please keep the parking for hiking closed until the village, the surrounding forests, and our watershed have truly had adequate rain. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
Hi, Betty Burrell from Sunset Drive. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but there was a fire on the south side of Whistler Mountain Tuesday morning caused by lightning and after a heavy rainfall. And I'd also like to mention that on the weekend down at Calvin Grove Park, there was no parking available for residents on the street because it was full of visitor parking, and those people were going to the cliffs. If the beach itself was like nicely empty, no tourists or visitors out of village. So that was nice for a change. That's one kind of nice thing that happened with all this trail, just parking closure. But yes, there was a lot of people at the cliff jumping site. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak? Okay. Marina, is there anyone in the online? Okay. Tamara, if you'll unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I would like to echo previous sentiments about being really grateful and thankful to council for put a moratorium for the moment on hiking on our trails. I live at the very top of the village. As you can see behind me, I'm in my backyard. It's dry up here. As we typically have our driest months, as you all know, in Lions Bay are August and September. September, we're eking out, waiting for those lush October rains. It's really dry. I don't think this coming weekend is the time to open up. My particular concern, and it's something that I've voiced with council many times, many previous councils as well. We currently do not have an evacuation plan. So if all of this goes up, we as a village have no plan on how to evacuate ourselves successfully from the top of the mountain down to the highway on our one road. We need a plan. We've hired people to put these plans in place. We do have an emergency services coordinator plus some volunteers, for which we are grateful and thankful. But before we start opening it up in tinder dry conditions, we need an evacuation plan and deserve an evacuation plan as a community. I just really respectfully request that council deeply consider the effect of overloading our trails at this time of the year when we don't have an evacuation plan. Our water supply is limited. And it doesn't matter what other communities are experiencing. They have different amenities and different resources than we do. Our resources are finite, our water and our forest is unique to Lions Bay. Please consider that when making your decision today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others in the gallery? No. Okay, we'll move to item number 4 is just the motion that was passed on Tuesday. And that was subject to hearing from our expert advisors. So why don't we move right to item number 5? And that is a review of the trail closure and input from Phil Fulkerson and Barrett. So Phil, we'll call on you first. And I believe just to give ample notice, Brant Arnold Smith will not be making it, but you had a chance to have a discussion with him, Phil. So perhaps you can give us some background on that.
Yeah, he Grant apologized, said he couldn't make it. Just so council is aware and everyone here is aware, I'm in almost daily contacts with him on multiple issues, but definitely on the fire conditions here in Lions Bay, as well as what they do. So a few things. He's reviewed all of the recommendations that I had previously sent to you guys, the council via email. Came back with a few edits to some of them, which essentially included conversation with Metro Bank in the past. So I guess before we jump into that, I do want to state that he had indicated that he felt that council had made the right decision at the time, given the conditions in the forest and the temperatures, as well as the lack of rain. So he provided that feedback, as well as his supervisors. They thought it was the right thing. There were a few other comments that he had. They spoke about they don't close their trails in Metro Vancouver for proactively this way. They've closed them for active fires and floods. One of the things he did say is it's not a political decision, it's an operational decision, and it's usually made by his staff based on conditions in the field. The recommendations that I gave to you guys, and I just want to briefly read them out. I have been in talk with emergency management and climate readiness in the Southwest region here. And I think those conversations need to continue, because what they're doing is trying to get all the ministries with jurisdiction of our trails around the table to talk about a longer term solution to this. And I think that that's pretty critical. Again, my thoughts were we're not getting them around the table soon enough for this season. But for the 2024 season, it's going to be critical to have their input. Those ministries include the Ministry of Forests, which is BC Wildfire, Ministry of Health, because of the issue of coliform and our watershed, and the ministries of municipal affairs as well as EMCR, emergency management, climate readiness. They all have some sort of jurisdiction over the trails or the people there or the water quality. So they all need to be around the table to have conversations on a longer term solution for that. So I recommend, I'm continuing that. I've requested a meeting with them because they're all in emergency mode right now, especially Forest and EMCR. And I've requested a meeting to be in late October. Is the soonest that they're going to be able to get everyone around the table. So that's continuing, that's coming, and again with the hopes that we end up with some sort of plan moving forward, a solid plan for 2024 with regards to the trails. So that was the first recommendation, that we continue on with that. The other thing is I prepared some legal questions that I'd like to get answered on a village basis. This is outside of the MCR. I've let them know that I requested legal answers on whether our situation with the hikers above the village and the issue with the increased call form meets the definition of emergency as it is in the act right now. And they're a little bit hesitant because the act is actually changing and the definition of emergency might change as well too, but I think we really need to get a read on that, a legal opinion on whether we feel that this would meet an imminent emergency. And then the other question that I had was if restricting people, i.e. restricting people from actually accessing the trails was a reasonable, how do they put it in the act, a reasonable precaution given the potential for emergency. So that document, again, I would really like to get feedback, advice on that, to know if we that declare a state of local emergency based on that. Because that gives us additional powers to be able to do things legally, and will hopefully take some heat off with regards to it as well too. So that's something ongoing. The third, I feel that well, that was the right decision to close the trailheads and not the trails themselves. I think that we need to have definite criteria for how it's done. Metro Vancouver puts out a fire report weekly, and I forward that to council via email. And I speak to Brant all the time about what the conditions are in the different areas, and they do forecasting in conjunction with BC Wildfire, so that they have their different fire ratings in all the different forests, and maybe our fire chief can speak to that a little bit better as well. But I feel that making a decision to close the trails needs to, one, not be political, it needs to be operational, and it needs to be based on set parameters that actually establish what the conditions are, whether they're high risk or low risk. And that takes away some of the negative feedback that we've been getting with regards to it being a political decision and not based on actual conditions themselves. And again, to reiterate, I do feel that the conditions were such that that decision would have been made anyways, whether you guys did it or not. So I think that that was a good decision. We just need to make sure we have set criteria for that. The other recommendation that I had was that criteria be reviewed on a weekly basis. We haven't declared a local state of emergency, so we don't have that. But the example I gave you was that if a local state of emergency was declared, it has to be reviewed every 7 days. And it has to be reviewed on criteria and then communicated out to the public based on whether it's going to continue or not. So I think, you know, a weekly review is probably a good thing. Again, Metro Vancouver puts out that fire report weekly as well too. And in conjunction with the fire chief, with EMCR, Metro Vancouver, and myself, you know, conditions can be evaluated and recommendations made. towards whether we should open or close the trails. So that was the third. I know I'm taking more than 10 minutes there, guys. I apologize. The fourth was actually that's monitored weekly. The fifth, communications to the community, whether it's residents or the larger community, the hiking community. I think they need to be clear. They need to spell out exactly what the criteria was. Based on my previous points when we decide what those criteria are. And I would also recommend that we use alertable as well too. So we've got almost 600 people signed up in the village here, but that also could include hikers coming to the village as well too. So that would be a good form of communication as well. So I think that was all the ones I had there. So I'll probably hand it off to you guys. To you. Yeah,
All right, Bill, thank you.
We ask questions as we
Yeah,
go along. If you want to get.
No, we can ask. Phil, do you mind if we ask some questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so for the email you referred to, which I think was it sent a couple of weeks back? You spelled out those criteria, and granted, we didn't use those criteria when we closed the trails.
Right.
But I think everyone was thinking along similar lines, and as you said, we probably got it right.
Sorry to interrupt for just 1 second. Can we just make it clear that we haven't closed the trails? We've closed the trailhead access.
Okay, yeah,
Trailhead.
thank you. I've been very good at trying to clarify that, but slipped up myself. It's too easy. Yeah, okay. Okay, to be clear, we closed parking, therefore limiting parking access for hikers.
Yes.
And it's probably a better way to put it. Anyway, your criteria for reopen of said description was daytime temperatures below 25 degrees C. And tomorrow we all know it's going to be above 25 and the same for Saturday. You said a fire danger of low or moderate, and I want to go to that in a second. And then you said forecasted rain or cover. We have another sprinkle coming on Monday, I believe, and we have another week of dry weather. So I don't think those criteria, as you spelled out, were met. And then the fire rating, maybe Barrett can talk to this. The fire rating, I struggle with. I assume we should be looking at the BC fires, provincial fires rating, because they own that land. But if I look at Metro and this idea that Metro is at low, I looked at Metro this morning. They have 30 or so regional parks. Maybe it's less, 25, whatever, I didn't count the number. Every single one is at moderate, with the exception of 3, and they're all on the North Shore. Capilano, Grouse, and then Headwaters. Those are the only 3 on the North Shore. All 3 are high. I would argue our hikers, up to 14,000 recreators from Metro a month, the category or the criteria we should be looking at is the same as those 3 regional parks. And because that's the closest similarity we have to our circumstance. Even though Metro doesn't have a regional park yet, whether they should be paying for it's another discussion, but we won't bring that up now. So I would say, in my opinion, we don't have any of those criteria. That's my assessment. You want to comment?
So that's not a question, but I'll
That's a comment.
speak to. So my email was more that there'd be criteria, and if you saw at the end of it, I'm like, hey, I'm open to suggestions, questions, and I hadn't spoken to Barrett at that point yet. I think it needs to be based on something. What I will say, and I've mentioned this with both the province and with Metro Vancouver, is that Lions Bay is unique, you know, and I think Barrett, you had said this before, is that, you know, all the other communities, for the most part, are up against the forest, not in the forest, and we are actually in the forest. And everyone that I speak to agrees with that scenario. So there are unique situations here. I just feel that we need to have some criteria. And again, I was just throwing those out going, I'm not a firefighter, right? I'm not even a forecaster. But we need to have some set of criteria to say, these are the criteria we're closing. And this is the criteria. When it hits this, we're gonna review it, and when it hits this, we're gonna reopen. That's reviewed on a regular basis. And the only other caveat I would put into that is if we do have another fire that comes within, 400 meters of the village of houses like we had a few fires ago at the Cliff Jump. And I think that's where, we just say, okay, we'll time out everybody, nobody's coming to the village, we gotta figure something out. And this I feel are some short-term solutions until we get to the long-term solution through the MCR and the other ministries with regards to what to do in 2024. But I really do feel we need to have some criteria, and this is where I would defer to Barrett, I defer to BC Wildfire, anybody else to come up with, what are those parameters that would be reasonable and that are applicable to our village and not just, like you say, other Greater Vancouver communities, because we are unique. I agree to that.
And I would say further to that, just the fact that every other metro community has the privilege of tapping into the metro water and the reservoir. We don't have that. So that kind of compounds our uniqueness in our ability to mitigate any sort of crisis that was to happen.
I'll leave that to these two guys. The conversation on water.
Yeah.
I know when I don't know enough, and I rely on the experts to say whether we have enough water or not to do that. But I do feel that we need to have that set criteria, and I also strongly feel while we made the right decisions, we didn't necessarily follow the right procedure, and there were some ripple effects. I've been getting a lot of comments back from the emergency program coordinator community, and I'm hearing that Barrett got a lot from the fire chiefs in the communities, and that they're all going, well, what'd you do? Did they're asking me if I declared a local state of emergency. I'm like, hey, no, I didn't know until an hour before it went out. So I think the conversations need to be had on a regular basis. I would recommend on a weekly basis that we're reviewing it. We make recommendations to hopefully a new CAO who would then implement operational things, and that it doesn't even necessarily have to get to a council vote. It's, hey, we've all agreed on what the parameters are. It's an operational decision, and then you guys are informed based on what's been made at an operational level, based on set criteria that we all agree to. Those are my recommendations on this, to make that smoother, hopefully a little bit easier in the media, and serve the community based on set parameters, right? So.
Just one question. In lieu of us not having a permanent CAO, and you've mentioned that this shouldn't in the future be a political decision, but it is at the current moment. So what is your recommendation under the current conditions? Would that be to keep things closed, or would it be to open it? I guess is my question.
So a few things to that.
And perhaps I may be jumping because Barrett, our fire chief, probably has a hammer and is the highest on the totem pole. So apologies if I.
It's not just me. I mean, I heard from the MCR and I heard from Metro Vancouver that it shouldn't be a political decision. And then of course, you see it all in the media, right? It's all politics and not based on set criteria. So I think communications need to be very clear, and it needs to not be a political decision. It needs to be an operational decision based on true criteria for the village, right? That we all agree on. And then there's no blaming on anything. And Barry, you can speak more to it, I'm sure, on what the criteria should be, but right now, I'm not a fire specialist as to whether we should open or close. I agree with the comment that said, our forests are tinder dry. I would have to defer to Barrett or even BC Wildfire to kind of get their take on it as to what the current situations are. I can tell you, politically speaking, it's not going to be popular to be closed over the long weekend when we've had rain and cooler temperatures. Now, beyond that, I can't answer or speak to anything. You guys know, right? We're gonna get based on that, unless we can show set criteria as to why we're keeping them closed, right? What's the reason?
Could you tell us what you spoke to the GBRD or to Metro? And what was their input? Did they support, my understanding is they supported the decision to close, but what was have you spoken to him recently, and what was his take on our discussion today?
Well, right off the get-go, he said, yes, great, it was the right decision. If we're hoping that EMCR or Vancouver will say open or close your trails, or trailheads, they won't do that. And they will not do that. He said it was the right decision based on the parameters, but they're not going to tell us whether to do it or not. The only one that can close the trails per se is BC Forests, who manage that area.
Yeah, well, again, we're talking about trailheads.
So he thought it was a good decision. He definitely had indicated he did not, well, actually even just today, I wanted to confirm with him. He said it's never a political decision and shouldn't be a political decision. That was right from Brian's.
Could I pick up on the political decision? My sense of the decision that was made at the time was within a context, and it was a judgment decision. Whether that's political or not, I'm not sure. We were sitting in a context of Kelowna was burning, Shuswap was burning, Kamloops, I think, has just been put out. Lahaina is gone. Northwest Territories is, protected. We're sitting there in a community that's in the forest. And to me, that was not a political decision. There was information that was.
I'll stop you there because I agree with you.
Yeah, well, okay, but yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just wanting to make the point that the decision was not political as such in my mind.
And it's a non-political decision made by politicians.
Okay.
And again, granted, we don't have a CAO, right? So
right. And so the normal process would be that it would have come from a set of experts to a CAO, recommendations to a CAO who would have made the call.
Yeah.
In the lack of a CAO,
fire chief here,
we made a call.
Having discussions probably with Carl, myself, and whoever else to get information, and then making that recommendation to the CAO, who would then say, yeah, based on the parameters, let's do it, and would probably get our public works guys to go and implement that, and then the CAO would inform council that those actions had been made.
Right.
So I agree. It was a non-political decision made by politicians. You're right. That's a good thing. So don't get me wrong.
No, I'm not. It wasn't criticism. I just was trying to clarify. Yeah.
We had here. So
yeah.
It's highlighting deficiencies in the process, and clearly having all those ministries at the table is something we have not had the opportunity to do. So I think right now we're dealing with a current situation, and moving forward, we see how it can clearly be done better.
And I've also, I guess the last thing, and then I'll stop bothering you guys. I also requested with EMCR, the Southwest pre-oc. What I've learned over this fire season is a lot of communities have an annual meeting with BC Wildfire, their fire chief, and any other sort of responding agencies in February to talk about how things should be operating for the fire season. Now, hopefully there is an end to the fire season at some point, but I've requested that they facilitate that here in Lions Bay in February. So again, that's another thing that we could do to have some advanced planning, everybody around the table, everybody understanding how things would operate. So I've requested that in February as well too. So
Phil, I got a question for you. I mean, just to go what Michael was saying, I don't think it was a political decision. It was a position made at this table. And in the absence of the longer term solutions and the operational staff strength where we're clearly lacking, I mean, council stepped up. and did that. I think it worked very well. I mean, there was a certain degree of unrest, but frankly, a lot of the people promulgating that unrest, I don't think they make it out of bed in the morning. They couldn't think their way out of a paper bag, and so we didn't quite have the insurrection moment that some might have feared. My question is, given what Neville referenced, that we are high all across the North Shore, that the province today at noon extended the state of emergency, and that Brent Arnold Smith said we'd made the right decision. I guess, to put you on the spot, what has changed? I mean, by my counts, we've gotten 11 millimeters of rain in Squamish and 17 in West Van. If we made the right decision then, what's changed?
So a few things that Brent made very clear to me this afternoon. They have not and will not close their trails proactively. They don't for this reason.
Right, we're not talking about closing trails, though, right?
No, but even closing access to trails, right? So my point of having said agreed upon parameters for when we're going to close the trailheads, I feel is critical.
Moving forward.
We will be, if they have all their trails open and trailheads open and we don't, and we can't specify why or what the criteria is for having it shut, then we're gonna be in a little bit of trouble there. So I think we need to have that set and reviewed regularly.
So Metro does that, but other communities don't. I mean, there are many that do close their trails and have bylaw enforcing it. In the interior, I come across trails regularly. When I was driving through Kamloops, those trails got closed. And we in fact have said we're not closing trails. But given that we don't have those set parameters and we don't have the machinery in place, and given that admittedly it was the right decision, I guess to restate the question, is it still the right decision based on the criteria that exist today?
I'd have to have a look at whatever document you were looking at, because what I got from Brent today said that there were a lot of the areas that were still on low risk because of the recent rain on a 3-day forecast. So I can't answer your question because I don't have the information. Maybe Barrett has more.
The one I was referring to, at Metro's website, parks, and list all the parks. They're all moderate except for the 3 on the North Shore.
I got a fire forecast from Brent today. That is dated August 31st of September.
I'll send you the email. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, it lists all the parks in Metro and every single one of them. Campbell, I mean, there's tons of them. Burns Bog, I mean, it goes through in Burnaby Lake alphabetically, and they're all moderate except the ones on the North Shore.
Yeah. So I've got Capilano, Lower Capilano, Redmond, Seymour, Lower Seymour, Pitt Lake, Langley, and Richmond all low on Metro Vancouver's forecast that came out.
Right, and then you go to Capilano River, high.
Right.
And then you scroll down, and it's all moderate, then you get to Grouse Mountain, high. And then you get to Lynn Headwaters, high.
Right.
And that's after the rain?
That is this morning.
This
It's
morning,
today.
correct. Yeah.
No, that goes against the report that he just emailed me. So,
Yeah.
again, like, I'm not the expert on this.
Right.
I'm just saying, if these are true and not bad, and we don't have
I think
parameters set.
But let's say.
I think I think personally, Paul, I think the difference is Metro regions versus what Metro lists for their parks. And what I'm saying, the situation we're dealing with here is more aligned to one of those 3 Metro parks than it is to somewhere else in North Van, be it Ambleside. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's the criteria we should look at once again going forward. So I'm going to try and encourage myself as well as everyone else, get off the closing trails, not what we're here to discuss. Are we here to reopen our parking lots, which was designed to reduce numbers, and maybe we should, yeah.
So I would say after Barrett talks, I would recommend that talk offline about what those parameters are. And again, I just threw out suggestions. I'm not the expert on that. So I can't tell you whether we should or whether we shouldn't. I can tell you the optics won't look good if we don't open. But again, so be it. If that it is, do that, but we really need to be clear on what criteria it is we're actually gonna use and the reason for why. So that's really just my statement to you guys, and we need to hammer that out.
I guess thank you for all of that. I mean, it's a non-political decision made by politicians, but it's not about being popular. It's about safety.
I agree.
So the media can throw the heat, the colorful emails we're getting from people. We also receive many complimentary ones in like giving us accolades for doing so and mitigating the risk. Yeah, even though there were divers that weren't able to park so they could go to use the beach, they were still incredibly respectful in their communications with us. So I think the majority of people truly understand the risk, and those that may have to make new plans for their Sunday aren't happy, and that's life.
So the last statement on that, and again, it's something that Brian said in our multiple communications back and forth. So when he said it's an operational decision, not a political one, he said it's got to be based on public safety risks and not perception. Right? So what are the actual risks based on what we see, not what our perception is? So that's where the rubber hits the road. What are those actual risks, and where is that?
Yeah, I think given Jamie's statement, and what you've said so far, I think we made, without those criteria set out, I think we made that decision, not based on optics, and I guess we'll wear the heat for needed.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, Phil, thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
You're up.
Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity. Wildfire is always a risk, pretty much from March to October, November now. So it's always a concern. We just have to decide on where we're going to do this, do that, limit, not limit, whatever it is. So I'm not gonna try to set policy or try to set an opinion. I'm gonna kind of give some insight into what the firefighting world is, what the challenges are, and what we face. Bill referenced we're a village in a forest. That's 100% true. We're this in town here. This is what's called intermix. It's not even interface, which is the buzzword last year and all that sort of thing. We're what's called intermixed. That has different firefighting parameters. That when it's intermixed, we have very quick response times because it's local. We have water supplies and hydrants that we have availability. So those kind of questions, timing, water availability in the community, it's quick, and we have that stuff. Up above us, it's not intermixed. It's not even interface. It's wildland firefighting. Wildland firefighting is a whole different beast. It's the actually actioning of fire is taken over days. It's whereas we'll have a matter of minutes with residential and intermixed fires to get ahead of the curve. Wildland fires is based on days response. They don't use domestic water. We use water from the ocean, we take trenches, we do all that sort of stuff. So with a brief kind of explanation of that, the best way to protect our community from intermixed fire is fire smart, right? I said I wasn't going to pass opinion, but my opinion is fire smart our homes, fire smart our infrastructure, cut branches back away from this building, do all that kind of stuff is going to give the village, the community, the infrastructure, the best chance of going forward should intermix fire actually strike. And that's actually intermix or at the edges of the community. That's what they call the interface where the forest reaches the side of the community. That's where the fire smarting, that's our best bet for protecting the village. Fires up above, like I said, they're not dependent on the water that we have. They're not dependent on like a rapid response. Fires up above us, fire moves uphill a lot faster than it moves downhill. It's not going to come down at any rate that is going to threaten us before we can get BC Wildfire, who has actual resources allocated. Yes, there are lots of fires going on in other parts of the province, and there are already lots of resources going to those other places in the province. But there is a stay-at-home crew. There is stay-at-home planes. There is stay-at-home resources here that are able to action the wildland fires that should one happen well above us in a timely manner. Again, I'm not talking minutes like we would be looking at here in the village or in a structured fire or an interface intermix scenario, talking wildland. There is proof. We have an ocean, there is water. Temperatures that we have now in the wildland, like wildland firefighting world, before it gets too extreme, there's a crossover point that kind of sets, puts the firefighters' hair on their neck up. And that's the 30-30 mix. Above 30 degrees, less than 30% humidity. That's when we start getting concerned. So that's when I would start getting concerned, and we can talk later and maybe put it into parameters. If we have 30 degrees temperature and less than 30% humidity, that could probably be one of the points where we put on the chart, okay, yeah, now maybe we can start limiting parking or take some more actions. Basically it's never, well, what should I say? It's never a bad idea to like just limit everybody, keep everybody out, never do anything, like lock everything down. Of course, no fires are gonna start other than lightning strikes, like there was a few the other day. But I don't think that's a feasible direction to go. The hikers that we do have up there, yes, the numbers are up astronomically. I 100% agree with that. The numbers are crazy. There are other ramifications to the watershed and all that kind of stuff, different political decisions. But as far as fire goes, there is 100 to 1, maybe more fires reported by hikers that say, hey, there's a lightning strike. If there is lightning strikes the past couple of days, there could be fires going on up there right now, but nobody seems to know because there's nobody out there. So the hikers and the backcountry enthusiasts, they turn in way more fires than they ever start. Okay, so they are a benefit when it comes to firefighting, having them up there. So I can answer some questions with regards to anything fire related. I'll try to stay away from on this topic, which way I would want to go. A little bit unclear, but if you want to throw some questions, I can field them.
All right, we'll open it up for questions. Go around the table.
I got one. You talked about parameters like 30 degrees, humidity and so on. It's hard to get set about that, right? I mean, let's say you had 2 days at 30, but you'd had a prior 30 days at 15 and raining. That clearly wouldn't trigger it. It's context as well, right? That wouldn't trigger something, whereas possibly you'd be in a more dangerous situation if you had 24 degrees and no rain for 2 months, right? I mean, it's context and the surrounding context that's important, right? These are not hard numbers that you just pick and say, okay, here we go. We're 2 days at 30.
We can go back and forth with regards to the parameters to how we want to structure our operational guideline. As if we reach A, B, C, or D, then we're going to do this. We can go over back and forth with that. But with regards to the firefighting and actually what's happening, that is the changeover point. You see fires go that like a lightning strike that right now is just smoldering on the ground. If we go from that above 30 degrees down less than 30% humidity, it kicks up and there is a transition point there. Whereas outside of that, it's going to stay smoldering, it's going to stay small and that sort of thing. So there is a correlation that magically kind of is around those. Yeah, probably 27 degrees and 30 or 25 degrees humidity. There's probably some context there as well. But for general, the 30-30 rule is a good indication of where things are going to go from not such an intense fire that would be out of control, like a small smoldering ground fire that may self-extinguish. And that's what BC wildfire does on the majority of their fires. They just look at it, they look at the conditions and say, leave it, it's going to put itself out. It's not over 30 degrees. It's not in a low humidity. So they sometimes leave it if it's in a place that's remote, like if we're talking the top of these ridges, or if we're talking 2/3 down, like just barely above us on Tunnel Plus, okay, maybe we might want to action that. But in the wildfire fighting world, we have days to do that sort of thing. When it's under those levels, they tend to stay quite small and on the ground.
One other question, just something I've always been curious about, fire moving uphill. Generally, yes, but what if you've got this onshore, offshore cycle, which we do? And you've got an offshore breeze that is traditionally the case here. Is the fire still gonna move uphill at night?
So there is possibilities when fire will come downhill. Those breezes that you're talking about, they tend to change at night when it comes down, right? And so what also happens at night, it's cooler at night. It's the temperature drops, the temperature drops away from that 30. The fire intensity rating goes right down, and it's kind of smoldering on the side. So a little bit of a breeze and at that time of day when it's now just put down onto the ground, a little grass fire, it might move a little bit. It's not going to move a lot. If you have a downhill breeze in the heat of day and that, sure, but traditionally the downhill breezes are coming at night when it's cooler and you're getting a higher humidity. And we're lucky that we have the ocean here that keeps our humidity up, which is a huge difference between here and the Okanagan. And it's even a huge difference between here and Whistler, Pemberton, that sort of thing. It's much drier there. So we're unlucky in the fact that we're a community in an intermixed fire environment. We're lucky that we're a community next to the ocean that's got a lot of humidity that is makes the start and the growth and the propagation of fire a little bit more difficult. The more traditional way that fire will move downhill is if a tree lights on fire and then falls, tumbles down, then it lights whatever's around it, and that continues to move uphill. So the more traditional for fire moving downhill is measured in feet or yards, not hundreds of feet coming down. Not to say that it won't.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess one last one. So to Marcus's point about it, 30 not being an absolute. Yeah, I don't have a mental picture of how often we above or below 30 degrees humidity. I don't really look at that, but I mean, I think we all know when we're above 30 degrees C.
Yeah.
And in the fires we've had in the last few years that have been fought around here, they probably weren't meeting that 30, but they still had to fight the fire, right? So it isn't an absolute.
That's correct. And so the most notable fire recently was the one at the cliff jumping area. Wildfire is rated on a 1 to 6 scale. 1 and 2 are ground fires. 1 is just like grass is burning. 2 is maybe there's a few twigs up the base of a tree. 3, you'll get some what they call spotting, where it'll come across a dry dead tree and it'll just rip up it and consume the fuel, and then it's back on the ground. And then 4, 5, and 6 are fires in the treetops. Fires in the treetop ranks 4, 5, and 6. They used to think that they were never possible on the coast here. What was it, 2 years ago, the Ilaho Valley had a rank 5. That was the first time anywhere near the coast, and that was well far up the Ilaho Valley. Not a little while about that fact in there, but the fires down here at the cliff jumping areas was a rank 2 on the ground with some spawns. Rank 2. It started. There were some cliff jumpers that thought it was a good idea to build a campfire, and that's, I don't know why anybody would ever think that. The cliff jumping spot is different demographic goes to the cliff jumping spot than goes hiking. The cliff jumping spot, if you've ever gone down there, there's beer cans, garbage, all sorts of stuff there that's being done. And it's more of a younger crowd party scene making poor decisions, like having campfires, right? That sort of stuff. That's the last two or three fires that we've had there. Is that exact same scenario? The hiking community just isn't that community. Yes, there are some campers that decide, or hikers that decide to camp overnight. And yes, they've had fires up there, and yes, they've all put them out. I've been with Lions Ranger for 8 years roughly in the fire department, messing, teaching and then going through the ranks. There was no hikers started fires in the past 8 years that I know of. We have had fires up there. A couple of years ago, there was another individual that decided it was good to get car tires, hike them up the mountain, light them on fire and roll them down. That was about 5 years ago. But other than that, we've never had hiker started fires other than the overnight stayers that would put a campfire right on the bluff and various other areas. I haven't personally seen it, but I've heard that, I've seen a cigarette fire here and I've seen a cigarette fire there and I've seen a cigarette fire there. Haven't personally seen it, but there's no reason why anybody would say, lie to me about it. But that's in those conditions. It's not hot enough. It's not dry enough. It's not enough fuel. If it did catch fire, it put itself out or other hikers found it. So the wildfires that we've had at the cliff jumping area, very obviously man-made by people making poor decisions. Haven't seen that up on the hiking paths with mostly hikers.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we all of us that live up there, and you do as well, have noticed there's differences in the hikers that used to come when we used to have a couple of hundred to, not trying to be derogatory here, but to the Instagram moment people that want to go to tunnel bus.
Yeah.
And I'm sure anyone that sits up there, I've seen it, people with, packing up sort of fire starters in their backpacks because they want to go to sundown, and there's been reports, and I've been up there and seen the residue of fires up there. So I think there's a difference in the type of hikers as well, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to reduce the numbers, because then the core value of hikers, no other ways to get there with the hikes and cyclists or whatever, are less likely to be the ones that make those bad decisions.
Yeah.
And then just another one observation, you're talking about tunnel bus, but the last big one we had at Eagle Ridge, I don't think that was 30-30, and that was started by a cigarette, right? And that brought in the full wildfire services to put that one out. So,
there's a little bit of BC wildfire. I don't want to say that was a political decision, but the guy in charge of BC wildfire in this sector was on the ferry watching that. And he, again, let's make reference to the resources. He diverted resources from other areas of BC. Planes that were going from the island to fires further inland were diverted into that. And it was a fair sized fire. It was probably 2/3 the size of the one that we had at the jumping area. And you are correct. It wasn't 30-30. It was cigarette thrown into the brush on the side of the highway from that lookout point.
okay.
Can you comment on just you talked about the intermix and the wildland. How would we be affected with our current, water situation in the village? Is this
with regard to intermix or
with regard to worries about, look, if we were to open this up, are we capable of fighting a fire? Do we have shortages in the village of water or fighting one near like we had with Calvin Grove? You did a fabulous job, you and the men, I think, and women. There was 24 on that Sunday, I believe, and you guys knocked that down before the BC Wild Service got to the site. So,
and that's with not to cut you off there shortly. The water is not a concern. It would be nice to have a million gallons available in a big bucket up there. But wildfire and forest fires is not far domestic water. So what we have in our tanks here, what we have in our creeks coming here, what we have in our infrastructure is inconsequential. to what's going on up there. Like, it's not gonna be used in a while.
Even on the edge of between the village and, you know, that buffer zone or?
So that's interface fire and intermix. So that's here, right? We have wooded areas, trees here, or if we go to the end of Sunset or the end of many other streets that back onto the forest, that's the interface. And yeah, if it's right next to us or if it's within the core of the village, that's interface on the sides, intermix in the middle. We're gonna use the 600 up to 600,000 gallon capacity of the village to use that. So if we have a fire, we're gonna use the water. It'd be silly not to. But the fires up the mountain, we're not using the water. There's different tactics, different ways of fighting fire. So that's why I kind of want to make a draw a difference between wildland firefighting, wildland interface / intermix, and structural firefighting. Wildland out in the hills or down at the cliff jumping has zero effect on our stored water capacity here. Yes, if there's a big raging fire, it destroys the forest where our water comes from. There's effects there if that's a big fire that burns down, but we're not using domestic water.
So if a fire starts a kilometer uphill, then our water supply is not an issue. But if it starts 100 meters uphill, then it'll likely involve our water.
Yep.
Right. So it just depends on where it starts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm like,
Yeah.
one's wildland, one is interface or interface.
Right. Or if the conditions are such, I mean, I've seen this up in the Shuswap. I've got a friend actually whose property is on fire now. The fire moved from the Adams Lake across the Highway 1, and then it circles up into a hillside, and then it starts dropping down the hillside. Even though that was burned about 10 years ago, I watched it burn. I've seen the trees exploding and cantling and coming down the hill. And I guess the humidity and the offshore breezes, which exist there as well, push that as well. It's interesting on the humidity. I watch that very carefully because I hate dry conditions personally. But we do drop down very dry. Sometimes we have these conditions where we will hardly cool off at night, and we do stay dry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
having that as parameter or gauge or a benchmark on making decisions, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Councillor Brown.
Okay, we made a decision a week ago Tuesday within a context, and we said that we would review that. And and we've committed to review that, which is what we're doing. And then on Tuesday, we looked and said, well, based on what it looks like, where things are going, we should be opening the trails, subject to input from our experts, our nearby experts. So which is what we're doing today. Kamloops apparently had all their trails were closed, and they are apparently now reopened. So I don't know what the criteria was for them to do that. So I guess where we are right now is Tuesday we took a vote to reopen the trails, subject to input from our resident experts. And so I guess what I'd be interested in, was that the right call? Should we be reopening, or should we be talking about the context of the week before?
I was only privy to what I saw in media, a couple of after the fact emails, and they spoke to the reasons of closing the fire was due to extreme fire risk. We're not in extreme fire risk. We're not in extreme according to the GBRD CAP rating system that we all will follow. We're not in extreme with regards to the 30-30 crossover. So for that parameter, I don't think we make it. The second one was what I heard on after the fact was because we don't have adequate water to fight a fire. I think I made the point that up there, we're not using our water. So that point is kind of new. Another point I think I saw was the village is in imminent danger from as shown by the fires around us, like the ones that the jumping areas. The cliff jumping area is over a kilometer away, and it was dry, hot, started by man-made people that made really bad decisions. The fire department were able to handle that with the help of RCM SAR, as well as other agencies, in a fashion that it never threatened the village. It never came past our first lines. We were able to hold it right away as soon as we got there and got set up over a kilometer outside of our community. So past history of the village being under threat and then quoting other fires around us, that's not super accurate. So yeah, if we stop everybody from going into the back country and 100% of people aren't there, we'll never have a cigarette strike. Okay, so that's, yeah, that's going to be 100%. But if we're going to let people enjoy the outdoors and try to find a line where we're going to set parameters and then cite the reasons that I only heard of after the fact and through social media and a few emails, I don't think it measures up to where I would want to see it. So I don't think I would have proposed. I wouldn't have recommended proposing. Is it the right thing to do with information at hand and the time frame? Sure. There was 100, like, yeah, it's there was no cars, so it's the right thing to do. But
what do you say to the probability argument? Which can all mind. So if we have 200 hikers going up there, we have X chance of one responsible person doing things like a fire.
Yeah.
If we have 10 times that, and these are the kind of numbers we're talking about, we more than tenfold you compare what used to be years ago. And so many numbers we have now, over 2,000 people a weekend, you have 10 times the chance. And that was one of the things we considered. I mean,
no, that's like the things that
and that's why this was meant to reduce the numbers,
yeah,
by controlling the block.
Yeah, no, and that's that's a decision for politicians to make. It takes this probability versus that probability. Can I reduce this and reduce that? Yes, there's schools. Yes, there's people that are going to start silly fires at the jumping area. Yes, there's smokers that might flick a cigarette, but as numbers go up, it's 100 to 1, 200 to 1, 300 to 1 of hikers that are going to report that fire. So your numbers go up to 10,000, you have that same percentage reporting it, that same percentage saying, hey, what are you doing? That same percentage stepping on the guy's cigarette or giving him crap for throwing it. So as far as a fire rating, to me, the only thing that's changed between this year and previous years is the number of people that you're talking about. And I fully agree, right? More people, more chance, but also more people there to identify, report, chastise, or even extinguish. So that's where we have to come up with a way to this parameter, that parameter, whatever, and set some triggers for it. So yeah, that's
all right.
My recommendation. I probably wouldn't from a fire department, fire chief, not a politician, not taking into other dynamics. As a fire chief, I don't think we were there. Had we been 30 degrees, humidity dropped, and a different case, sure, but I don't want to take away from being overly safe. So in that sense, it's the right decision. Right? If you stop everybody, there's not going to be a fire. So we're safe. So that's where I can give advice and you guys make decisions.
All right, Baron, thank you very much, and thank you, Phil. Any further questions?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Any further questions before we move on? Carl, you're also here. Anything you would like to add before we move on the agenda?
No, not in terms of how you would establish whether or not to rescind the parking restrictions. I'll just say that there will be some fatigue from the public. As you have seen from comments, we did move some of the parking around to where it's currently unrestricted. We saw a lot of illegal or against zone parking. People just paid the ticket or just accepted the ticket. I'm really only here to know what the decision is going to be because our guys have to come in not as early as they have to come in to set up because they have to get there before anybody parks there. They came in at 4 when we set up last time. But it's 2-man days each time. And we have other things to do. Yeah, and we have 2 men.
Okay.
That's part of it. So I presume the last thing you'd want to see us doing is lifting and rescinding on an ongoing basis, given the limited manpower you have.
Yeah, I mean, we'll assign the manpower as directed, but we have better things to do. So yeah, I would prefer not to chop and change.
Yeah.
Just one comment to what you guys did, and you heard this from others, but I'll just speak for everyone. It was fantastic work.
Amazing.
Yeoman effort, the highway sign, in 2 days, it was just amazing, and it worked really well. I know there was issues in other parts of the people knew they could go park somewhere else down the highway, Brunswick and so on. But largely what we set out to do worked, and that's all it worked really well, and that's all credit to the workshop. So
Thanks.
well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, thank you to everyone for your input. So appreciate that. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, which was so just to review, we passed the motion on Tuesday. It was subject to input from our expert advisors. So we've had that. So that motion to open up the trailheads has been passed, and that was passed as of Tuesday. Now, what we have on the table is a new motion put forward by Councillor Abbott. And the motion reads, council hereby revokes to take a longer term view. Apologies. Council hereby resolves to take a longer term view when assessing the reopening of the parking for hikers seeking to access trails, and that beginning with the regular council meeting of the 5th of September 2023, and at each regular council meeting thereafter as necessary until the end of this calendar year. Council will review the relevant available data and professional opinions in consideration of reversing the closure of parking used to access the trails surrounding the village of Lions Bay. And that is the motion. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, discussion before we call the question.
Let me just say, again, you said that the motion that we passed earlier in the week was to reopen the trails subject to expert advice. I think what it was that we would receive the expert advice and then consider at that moment, after we've received the advice, whether we wish to reopen. Am I misunderstanding that?
I'll read the motion that was passed. The motion to reopen the trails by Friday, September the 1st, 2023, subject to input from Southwestern EMCR, Metro Vancouver, Lions Bay EPC Chair or Coordinator, and the Lions Bay Fire Chief. And that was a resolution that was passed 3-2 on Tuesday. And if we are putting forward this resolution, which is on the table and has been seconded, that would override the resolution to open the trails, subject to our expert input, which we've heard. So that's what's on the table, and it's open for debate. And who would like to go first on that?
Well, I would say that we've heard only one recommendation on where it stands on whether the trails would be reopened or not, and that would have been from the fire chief. Nobody, no other body has made a recommendation other than maintaining the trailhead closure access that we had done as saying that it was a good idea and a good call in the consideration. So there hasn't been an overwhelming recommendation to reopen from my perspective. And the way it stands, we have had some rain, which is great. My feeling is that it would be premature to reopen during probably what could be even one of the busiest weekends of the year. And unfortunately, it's just the one person making a poor decision that can destroy a community. And I appreciate that having boots on the ground reporting these things, but the situation at the cliffs was, it was reported by a resident who was out on their boat who saw the fire. Those that started the fire got in their cars and hightailed it out of there. So that doesn't sit entirely well. I understand the demographic of those using the backcountry has changed, and not everyone's responsible. And from the feedback and emails that we've gotten from those that do respect the backcountry has been positive. And the threat to the watershed is just really, really significant to me.
Okay, Councillor Reuter, we'll put you up second, and Councillor Broughton third, and Councillor Abbott fourth, and I'll go fifth. So over to you, Councillor Reuter.
Yeah, I'd echo what Jamie's saying. I think given, I mean, the amount of rain we've had is very, very small. I've walked through the forest. It's bone dry there still. I don't think much has changed. Looking at the Metro website and the warnings as to the North Shore parks, which I think are relevant. We discussed that earlier. And given the fact that the province still has extended the state of emergency just this noon, I think that the wise move is to keep this in place. The motion is to reconsider it as needed in our regular council meetings. We are not yet in the wet season that we wish to be in. And I just remind everybody, last fall was very, very dry into October. I hope that's not the case here. But I see that the danger is still very, very present. I am concerned about the water supply as well. And of course, the effect on our watershed should something happen. So I think I would support the motion that's on the table.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Broughton.
I think I'm hearing from emergency, our emergency program coordinator that, well, he's not an expert on that in terms of what else feedback he's getting from the province and so on, that it's asking us to question that and question the decision. I really was very impressed with our public works manager who spoke quite passionately and adamantly about not closing the area, and yet did a phenomenal job of undertaking what we asked him to do. So, but I'd be interested just at this point in time, your feeling of whether this is unfair or not, but like to where would you be at this point, having seen the impact and how well it was received and so on? What is your thinking at this point?
Well, I mean, as to the political impact, that's totally in council's purview to decide if that's something they want to sustain. But yeah, the parking provisions were somewhat effective. We did move some demand elsewhere. my technical opposition is only a statistical one. I'm not convinced the correlation between reduced hiker numbers and reduced wildfire risk. And that's all, but I didn't recommend it because I was concerned that within short order, the public would find ways to get around what parking restrictions we put in place and continue hiking. We saw, especially down in the lower village for the beach parks, that people were arriving by bus and taxi. The beach park was packed on Sunday. Some of them did park in permit required spaces and got a ticket, and unfortunately, they presumably undertook that knowingly. We actually give the fine on the sign now. So yeah, my recommendation was only that I wasn't convinced that it would ultimately be effective in reducing wildfires.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we certainly expect it to be perfect. We knew it was going to be quite imperfect, but we were going for some benefit. We were in a situation of extreme risk, we felt, and we were going for some benefit, and I think we achieved that. So, yeah, it's going forward. Is there going to continue to be benefit? It sounds to me like there will, maybe, so.
Okay, Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, so just I'll touch anecdotally on the comment of how effective it was. I went out and drove around and walked around the streets. Obviously, I live in the neighborhood. It was, I thought, dramatically effective. There was very, very few cars, and the ones that we got ticketed. And I'm seeing some nods from other people in the neighborhood. Your trail cam will finally tell us the answer. Obviously, you haven't downloaded the numbers yet.
Trail cam.
Trail counter. What did I say? Acid cam.
Yes, my cam.
Oh, sorry. Trail counter. And yeah, acknowledging that some people may have used highway parking and so on, and so it didn't come up the streets, so we wouldn't have seen those. But that's a relatively small number compared to how many you can get on Sunset Mountain and Bayview. So I think that the trail counter will demonstrate that. I think my main reason, I think we made a good decision. It was not a comfortable decision. Well, it was a challenging decision, but it was a good decision. I think the wrong thing would be to take a knee-jerk action. I do think, and that's why I wrote in that resolution, a longer-term view. I hear from the workshop manager that, and I'll just paraphrase it maybe a little differently, that you only want to do this once. And I think we should not be opening up the parking again. If we think there's any chance, we're going to have to reverse it again, because that would be the worst thing. I think when we do it, we're never going to be 100% sure, but there needs to be a level of comfort that we're done for the season. And I don't think that's far away. Well, it shouldn't be far away under the normal weather patterns we see, but it's not here now. So that's my take.
Okay, thank you for that. My take is, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Bill and Barrett for their input and watching over the community, and also Carl. I would defer to our experts, myself, and specifically our fire chief. And what I heard from him is we're not in an extreme situation and we don't meet the 30-30 criteria. And there was a number of other points put together prior to Tuesday's special meeting. I did reach out to Brant from Metro, and he said the risk was low at that time, and I've talked to him, communicated with him since. He says it's low. So I would defer to our experts, but I think there's been lots of commentary and it's been very healthy. So I look forward to the future when this is taken off the politicians' agenda and put more with the experts and also our hopefully new CAO that we'd like to see in place in the near term. So with that, no other comments. I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Yes.
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 Opposed?
I'm going to abstain on it because I really would like to support the input of the resident experts that we brought in.
Mhm.
But I certainly, it's
Oh,
here
fair
are the
enough.
concerns here.
Fair enough. I would go with the expert opinion, so I am opposed. So, motion carried. So the closure remains in place and, will be reviewed at the next meeting and, subsequent meetings.
Which is only 5 days away.
Okay, do we have, any, public participation from the gallery? Yes?
I'll just mention that in the media, they are convinced the trail's opening tomorrow. The trail access is opening tomorrow. So I would suggest that some sort of media contact is vital in the next 12 hours to say that's not actually the case. I now know that we don't have to reverse the highway sign, which says that line space parking is closed. But I would highly recommend a re-contact of the media today, not so fast.
Okay,
Because I don't believe it. I would say the public in general believes that it's open season starting about now.
okay, thank
What do
you.
we do?
I think we go through every point in the 12-point plan that we put together with the TAPCA and recheck every one of those steps.
Okay. Phil?
Just make a recommendation based on Barrett's points that the communications were not completely accurate with regards to fires and that type of thing. I think I'd be careful how you communicate that this time. You say there were certain points that
Weren't accurate
from a fire point of view. You need to get your ducks in a row.
Okay, maybe a suggestion is we draft up a news release and perhaps we can pass it by Barrett and Phil.
More Barrett than me, but
Yeah.
it needs to be accurate. We can't be stating something.
And Carl as well.
Wouldn't it suffice to just say the correction to whatever misperceptions may have occurred in recent media postings, but the parking remains closed in Lions Bay?
something like that. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think we need to re-justify it.
Yes, we should not re-justify it.
Right.
If we had a bad message before for some technical reason, let's not reopen the debate, let's just live with it.
Yeah.
And not re-justify it, but let's, clear up what we're doing going forward.
Okay, we'll put something together and we'll pass it by Barrett and Phil. Okay,
We did have one hand in the back.
and we're gonna move to public participation, so
That was the hand in the back.
Yeah.
Peter's putting his hand up.
why don't we'll start here.
I like the process you've gone through, getting all the communication in place and stuff, but one thing that strikes me is, from my experience in emergency services, they're not an exacting science. And you can do the best you can, but you're always, hoping it's gonna go your own way and you're gonna be successful in it. But you don't know because it's not an exacting science. Fire will go in the strangest places, it will start in the odd places. So I think if you could always remember that. The other thing that strikes me as important is the communication. The communication and all these emergency things has to be including all operational and council members. Everybody who's involved in the process should be kept up to date on an ongoing basis. So pardon me for being a little self-serving, but if I'm gonna be a deputy help, somebody's got to hit the CC button with my name on it. Appreciate it. I don't mean to be critical or anything, but it was just a bit of goof.
Yeah.
To be part of the.
I did try to correct that last night. I think you got a few emails.
Yeah. Very well. It was very interesting. Anyhow, well done.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the gallery here before we move to the Zoom gallery? No? Brandon, if you,
Yeah, Tom Jesperson.
okay. Tom, if you unmute.
Yeah, hello. One thing that sort of struck me in the conversations here is you keep saying trails, and really it's the watershed for me is a key component. You're comparing the trails to something, you know, Stanley Park or Burns Bog, when in fact, half the mountain is a reservoir for our water supply. And it's important to note that in Vancouver, all the reservoirs are closed, and specifically, fire is mentioned as a concern as to why they have been closed. So we are being generous with access here, and we need to factor in the importance of those watersheds. I don't know how many, you know, it's not an interface fire. It's going to be bucketed in. You know, how much salt water can we throw in those creeks? How much fire retardant can we throw in those creeks? How much burnt ash and broken rock and things can go into those creeks and not compromise our water? So I'd like to see if you're coming up with criteria. I think a simple 30-30 sounds very simple, but you're not taking into account the consequence of that and what the impact is to Lions Bay.
All right, thank you, Tom. Marina, we've got an iPhone. I'm not sure who that is, and perhaps you can announce your name.
I don't know if it's me, S. Monfort. Is that who you're referencing?
Yes.
Mayor Barry, sorry, can you? Okay. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I'm going to be candid. I am incredibly disappointed as a resident of Lions Bay with the decision that council has come to. You invited experts to come and give you your expert opinion. None of them spoke about the concern that Councillor Cunliffe has with regards to the watershed issue. Our fire chief recommended that on a rate of 100 to 1 or 200 to 1 or 300 to 1, hikers are far more likely to report forest fires than not. And the fact that, you know, you as a council are not listening to the advice of experts, and at the last meeting on Tuesday, Councillor Reuter balked at the idea of handing this decision to the experts is shocking, when literally what we're talking about is how we're going to deal with fire, how we're going to deal with access to water resources. And I think it's important for you guys at that table and Councillor Cunliffe to think about what our position is when and if there is a fire and the rest of Metro Vancouver thinks of us as a bunch of elitist, entitled, self-absorbed, I won't use the word that I was going to use to describe us, okay? And when we need Metro Vancouver to come and help us to fight a fire that may be started by a hiker, but more same as could be started by a lightning strike, just the same. How are we going to turn to our neighbors to the south when we've excluded them? And this is nothing other than NIMBYism cast about as, oh, we're worried about fire. We're worried about the impact on our water supply. I didn't hear any of the experts talk about this impact on the water supply. And frankly, the chances are, if there's a fire, whether or not it's caused by a hiker or if it's a lightning strike, we're gonna have to deal with that consequence. That's an infrastructure question that council should turn its attention to, as opposed to weekly meetings about whether a political decision should be made, whether, you know, we can allow other citizens to come and use our facilities. I would love to see what we would feel like if West Vancouver said we can't use Park Royal, or we can't use the swimming facilities that West Vancouver Recreation has available. Where does this end? Where does this end? We're privileged to live here, and it's a responsibility of ours to be able to enjoy it with our fellow citizens. And this is so embarrassing to be a resident in this community as a result of this decision.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Tamara, we'll move to Tamara. Tamara, if you'll unmute, we can't hear you.
Hi, yes. So I commend you on this decision. I would like to follow up by saying I really would encourage you guys to dig deep and come up with an evacuation plan. I don't think it makes sense to open up the trails or the trailhead without an evacuation plan. And I'm sure the fire chief is the first one to say, you know, every building, every school, any kind of cruise ship you go on, hotel that you stay in, they all have an evacuation plan and it's posted. Here's how you get out. Here's how you here's how you access, but in case of trouble, in case of fire in this instance, here is our plan. And I really think we're long overdue as a community, and council has the resources, the dedicated resources directed toward an individual whose sole thought is an evacuation plan. And as a community, we would really like to see it, especially with fire so much on our minds. And I think that the trailheads, yeah, it would be nice to use them, but in case of fire, we need an evacuation plan. How are we going to get people off the mountain, including residents, not just hikers, but hikers as well as residents who live at the top of the village? How are we all getting out in case of fire? Thank you so much for your time and consideration of this question tonight. I think you guys made the right decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Marina, anyone else? No other questions? With that, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second. All in favor?
Yeah.
Opposed, carried. Thank you, everyone.